What would you do for love if you felt that you weren't enough?
You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my Foul Play February series. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's video is going to be about a love experiment. And yes, you read that right, love experiment. Now, I think we've all kind of wished at some point in our life that love was just some magical spell that we could put on somebody and make them like you back, or make a celebrity fall in love with you when you were younger. And this experiment kind of does that. It's a way to make people closer without even really trying that hard. And it was kind of created in a more lab situation, and not something that you're injected with or you inject someone with, more of something that you can do to instantly feel closer to someone. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be going over that, where I'm not going to make you fall in love with me. So we're not going to be doing it today. I'm going to be explaining it today for Valentine's Day, because I thought it was just the perfect creepy way to do a video on Valentine's Day without it having to be, a sad murder like yesterday's case, which was so very important and was quite a long video. So if you haven't watched that, please go watch that one as well. But for this one, we are going to be seeing what you have to do to make anyone feel closer to you and possibly fall in love with you. And I realized that this coat kind of makes me look like I'm wearing a lab coat. I didn't do it on purpose, but if it fits. And you'll have to let me know at the end of this, because I feel like this could totally be the basis of a Black Mirror episode without, kind of the technology of it, but just kind of the overall science fiction, dystopian, or utopian, I guess it would be, kind of world and controlled society. And it's crazy. I'm posting every single day this month, so if you do not know that or are not subscribed, please do that, and thumbs up this video if you want me to continue posting this month. And yeah, let's get into the story. So a man named Arthur Aaron was born July 2nd of 1945, and he went on to get a bachelor's in philosophy and psychology in 1967. But the next year, he actually got a master's in social psychology. He got those from the University of California at Berkeley, but then he went on to actually go to the University of Toronto for a PhD. He then became a professor at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. But his focus had always been on kind of the role and the creation and the maintenance of interpersonal relationships and intimacy. Back in 1967, when he was still in school, he actually met Elaine Spaulding, and they kissed in front of Dwindle Hall, and it was just an instant connection that led them to get married shortly after. And from that, they both wanted to research more into the mysteries of attraction and intimacy and love. Arthur said he fell in love very intensely. Anytime he loved, it was so incredibly intense, and so he wanted to research more into it, what made him that way. But what he found was that there was hardly any research on love. So he and his wife started working together to make more of a scientific way of knowing how to love and why we love. They used the experimental generation of interpersonal closeness as a guide, and within that there had been experiments done where subjects would be paired and they would work on self-disclosure and relationship building tasks within the two of them, and within about an hour and a half they wanted to see how close they would feel, the intimacy within one another, all created by a laboratory study. There were two different variables. One was that they would not have all of the same beliefs based on a questionnaire that they would take, and then the second one was that they would have an expectation that they would actually like one another when they went into the experiment. Now, I actually think that this experiment was just for straight or opposite sex couples, but I think it could have worked for any type of relationship, because obviously love is love. That's what I believe, and I think that it could have worked in any situation, and they did actually change it in a different study, which we'll get to in a little bit. You see, these couples would go into a room alone for about an hour and a half, and they would complete these tasks that they were given, and would just all together get closer and know more about each other. And they weren't sure that this was going to change anything, that anybody would actually connect from just an hour and a half of knowing each other, but it had such great results, and the impact of closeness was crazy. People were hanging out after class. One pairing even got married after doing this, and so they decided to change it up a little bit. Then they decided to do it in a classroom setting, just doing 45 minutes together of opposite sex partners and same sex partners this time, and they were going to see if it would have the same effect, basically. It was a psychology class that was 3 weeks into their studies, and then it was announced that they were looking for volunteers for this study that would bring closeness. Ultimately, that's what they were looking for, is how to create relationships and closeness. And so they were asked, all of these students, if they would like to be volunteers, and it was completely voluntary, not mandatory whatsoever. They actually said, "You will be paired with another person in the class whom you don't know. We will match you based on the questionnaire you are about to complete, with someone we think will like you and whom you will like. During the first hour of class on this day, you and the person we have paired you with will do a series of activities, such as talking about particular topics designed to help you get close." Now, I told you they were not required to, but nearly 80% of the class did the questionnaire that day, and 90% of those attended class on the experiment day. And in this questionnaire was a consent form. And then we also had 17 attitude questions, which just told them a little bit about you and what you did or didn't like in a relationship, what you would expect from someone, and what you would absolutely not want in a relationship. And the day of, they were already separated into premeditated pairings, and they were seated away from all of the other couples so they could have their own space. And they were handed an envelope, which they opened to find an instruction sheet as well as 3 slips of paper, which were the tasks. They would have 15 minutes to complete each task, and they would switch back and forth asking them, but they would both answer whatever was on there. It was like a question, and they would both answer whatever was on there or do whatever was the task. They were then asked to separate from their partner they were placed with and filled out another questionnaire. This time was more about the relationship they formed and whether these certain attitudes were more self or partner, to just show if their perspective of themselves had changed after that interaction, or if they knew anything about the partner that they were paired with at the end of that hour. Then they had another study, and this one did pair people with same beliefs, except for half of them actually had one or more disagreed beliefs, so they did not have the same beliefs, but none of them were told in the beginning that they would even like each other, so they were all set to assume that it didn't really matter, that there was no special matching ceremony, that it didn't matter whether they disagreed on things or agreed. They were just being matched randomly. The ones who agreed were told on their sheet, on their information sheet, that they were matched specially, but the ones who disagreed were not. On the sheet given to the ones who agreed, it said, "We have taken great care in matching partners," while the ones who disagreed had a paper that said, "We have no special reason in your case to assume that you or your partner will like each other." And they wanted to see how telling people that they would be a good match changes the effects of their closeness. But at the end of that experiment, they found that it really didn't matter whether they had told them they would be a good match or whether they didn't, or whether they disagreed or agreed. There was still that same amount of closeness or attraction to that person. But between both of those studies, it was found that 37 pairs were secure in their relationship, 11 were avoidant or dismissive, 23 were avoidant and fearful, and 26 had one that was a preoccupied partner. And in the next study, they decided to test the closeness of introverts and extroverts, and if you could pair 2 extroverts together, 2 introverts, or an extrovert and an introvert, and which one would be closer. They also only told half what the experiment was actually about, and that they wanted them to see if they could get close. They just thought it was some random experiment where they were going to be partnered and have to do tasks. They didn't know at all why. This was all based on a questionnaire that asked questions from the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Test, which is a whole huge personality test that asks you very in-depth details, and it's one of the best personality tests I've ever found. I'm an INFJ, if any of you want to know. I can do a whole video on that and, you know, what makes me that, if you guys want to know a little bit more, because I find it super, super interesting. And if you know yours, I'd love to hear it down below. But they did it based on that to see, you know, who would be the best matched based on introvert and extrovert. And then it was found by the end of that it didn't matter that they didn't tell half the class that the premise of this was to be close. They had about the same level as all of the other studies. But it was found that the extroverts experienced more closeness than the introverts did. But oddly enough, it was found that after all of these studies, about 45 minutes after, these participants would say that the partner they had just been with had a level of closeness more than any relationship they'd ever had in their life, and that was about 30% of them that actually said that. They actually went back to talk to the participants 7 weeks later to see if any of them, had any contact afterwards with their partner, and it was found that 57% had a good conversation afterwards, which is closeness, and that is what they were going for, not really a relationship, just the closeness, and they did have a good conversation, where 35% did something together, and 37% sat together in class after that, making them physically close. And this was what they were wanting to see, is if putting someone together, forcing them to be together, would actually bring more closeness that could lead into a relationship or a friendship. They said it wasn't all up to necessarily their experiment, that was some magical thing. It was just forcing a natural thing that could happen to go ahead and happen. But they were unsure if it would produce loyalty or commitment the same as other relationships. But it was found that especially for introverts, the type of task that they did determined the closeness of them in the end. They then decided to do another study, kind of a random one, of 222 students, where the men and the women were placed in two separate rooms and they were matched randomly. They just picked one and picked the other, and they were matched. They were told to do the tasks, and they were also told that the whole premise was to be close to one another, and it produced about the same results as the people who had been matched based on their personality, which I thought was really strange, that maybe just if you tell someone that you want them to be close, or they know that that's their intent, then it works better. And it doesn't really matter if they were to know each other, because ultimately I think personality only really matters in the long run, whereas like being close to somebody for an hour or two is just kind of more the situation. But overall they found that the avoidant pairs felt the least closeness to their partner. The preoccupied pairings got along the least, because of course one person wasn't fully in it. And of all of the pairings, there was a noticeable difference in how the people filled out a questionnaire before and after they met this person. It was almost like they changed a little bit. But are you interested to know kind of what these tasks are? Because I really was, so I'm going to read you some of them that they put on the slip of paper and made you either answer or do. So there were 36 questions that they could possibly get, so I'm going to read you some of them now, just because I think that it tells a lot on what they believe will make a person close to one another, and what they think that you should ask somebody if you want to feel a little bit closer. So set 1, the first question is, given the choice of anyone in the world, whom would you want as a dinner guest? Number 2, would you like to be famous? In what way? Before making a telephone call, do you ever rehearse what you are going to say? Why? What would you constitute a perfect day for you? When did you last sing to yourself? To someone else? If you were able to live to the age of 90 and retain either the mind or body of a 30-year-old for the last 60 years of your life, which would you want? Do you have a secret hunch about how you will die? Name 3 things you and your partner appear to have in common. For what in your life do you feel most grateful? If you could change anything about the way you were raised, what would it be? Take 4 minutes and tell your partner your life story in as much detail as possible. If you could wake up tomorrow having gained any one quality or ability, what would it be? And each set has 12 questions, so this is set number 2 now. If a crystal ball could tell you the truth about yourself, your life, the future, or anything else, what would you want to know? Is there something that you dreamed of doing for a long time? Why haven't you done it? What is the greatest accomplishment of your life? What do you value most in a friendship? What is your most treasured memory? What is your most terrible memory? If you knew that in 1 year you would die suddenly, would you change anything about the way you are now living? Why? What does friendship mean to you? What roles do love and affection play in your life? Alternate sharing something you consider a positive characteristic of your partner. Share a total of 5 items. How close and warm is your family? Do you feel your childhood was happier than most others? How do you feel about your relationship with your mother? And this is set 3. Make 3 true we statements each. For instance, we are both in this room feeling... Complete the sentence. I wish I had someone with whom I could share. If you were going to become a close friend with your partner, please share what would be important for him or her to know. Tell your partner what you would like about them. Be very honest this time, saying things that you might not say to someone you just met. Share with your partner an embarrassing moment in your life. When did you last cry in front of another person? By yourself? Tell your partner something that you like about them already. What, if anything, is too serious to be joked about? If you were to die this evening with no opportunity to communicate with anybody, what would you most regret not having told someone? Why haven't you told them yet? Your house, containing everything you own, catches on fire. After saving your loved ones and pets, you have time to safely make a final dash to save one item. What would it be? Why? Of all the people in your family, whose death would you find most disturbing? Why? Share a personal problem and ask your partner's advice on how he or she might handle it. Also ask your partner to reflect back to you how you seem to be feeling about the problem you have chosen. And then those are just some of the many questions that they made them ask one another in the experiments to ultimately force the closeness like it was a strong bond already. And I can see why, because you're ultimately getting to know somebody in a matter of an hour, which is exactly what they wanted. So with that, Arthur Aaron, who we talked about in the beginning, took 36 of those questions and began experimenting with his own class and kind of doing some smaller experiments on his own. He once even went on the Today Show and had 2 different couples, but 4 people who didn't know each other, asking each other these questions, and by the end they were laughing, they were crying, they were talking so openly, and everybody was so amazed at how close they had gotten and how much they were willing to share once they started opening up. But although these experiments are made just for closeness and not really relationships, it's said that if possibly they were all going in there for the same common goal of wanting a relationship, it could happen that way. But with these experiments, it was more just, the volunteers that were just there to test it and not necessarily wanting to fall in love. But a certain journalist actually did want to fall in love, and so she decided to try this on a blind date whom she told she was actually going to do this to, because if you just bombard somebody with 36 questions on a blind date without explanation, it may go south quickly. But Joni Bergen actually took it on this date, and she was a little nervous, but she started asking these questions, and he started asking them to her back, and by the end of it they talked for 5 hours because they would get off track on the actual questions. They would go into tangents about their life and talking to one another about it, and by the end of it they actually felt incredibly close, so much so that they went on another date. And that time they talked for the same amount of time, and they weren't doing any of the questions. It was just a natural conversation. I mean, what do you think? Is this a guide to love, or is it a placebo that you just think that you are closer because you've been told to and told that it will work? I'm not sure, but I will say that I do things like this. I always have on my dates or talking to anybody, because I find that it does bring you closer when you just ask the deep, hard, universal questions up front and you don't start surface level, because I hate when someone's like, oh, what's your favorite color? How are you? I cannot stand it. I don't want to talk about that stuff, because ultimately that's not what's going to make me feel a bond with you. And if we start out like that, chances are we won't make it to the hard stuff that we don't really necessarily want to talk about at first. But I think it's important, and I find it super interesting to know more about people like that, and so I've always done it, which I think is weird that it's an actual experiment that I've always been doing my whole life and had no idea about it. But let me know if you do it as well down below, or if you're going to try it at all. Maybe not like 36 questions right up front, but just a few good ones thrown in there can tell you a lot about a person. But who am I to give relationship advice? But you'll have to let me know what you think about this overall experiment, if you think it's just stupid or if you think it would actually work. And if you want to answer any of those questions for me to know you a little bit better down below, I would love that. You guys know that I love knowing more about you. You guys are not just a username or a profile picture to me. You are actual people, which you are, but I feel like so many people can forget that, and I haven't, and I really love knowing more about you. So if you want to answer some down below, you totally can. And if you want to know any about me, ask me and I'll answer it for you as well. But overall, I hope this was a good video for Valentine's Day for you, a little more positive and upbeat, and hopefully if you're going on a date tonight, I don't know if anybody goes on a first date on Valentine's Day, I'm not sure that's the best idea, but if you are, maybe try this out, or maybe even if you have been in a long relationship, try it out on some of these questions you're not sure about with your partner. Maybe it could help the relationship. Who knows? But I will stop rambling. Don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye. Happy Valentine's Day, by the way.
Can we force affection? Does that equal relationship perfection?